Story is from Whip Solo. Karen demands I move 2 cars impounded by the police and meets Mr. Sparky. This story is from roughly 2013. I was an adjuster for Lizard Insurance and would go to many tow lots after car accidents and decide if a car was a total loss or send it to a body shop, as well as do the initial write-up of an estimate on repair costs. The tow lot I was at this day also worked with the state police and housed their overflow storage for anything deemed evidence and on hold from release. These vehicles were kept behind a locked gate inside the already fenced, gated tow yard. I was there to do an appraisal on 2 vehicles that had been involved in a minor accident. However, both were left unable to drive from the scene due to either multiple flats, lights knocked out, or windows busted. I've finished the first vehicle, and I've started taking photos of the second vehicle. I have headphones in, and I'm listening to the album Cavalcade by the Flatliners. Seriously, check them out. Anyhow, I see a woman I'd guess around 50 walk up to the police evidence lot and the gates swing open out of the corner of my eye. Not paying much attention, as the vehicles I was working with were on the same side of the lot, but about 50 meters down from the evidence lot. As my back is turned to this woman, I will here on refer to as Karen. I take the last couple of photos I need, the last being a photograph of the VIN of the vehicle, which is located where the windshield meets the hood, almost on the dash through the windscreen. Hope this makes sense. Karen, out of literally nowhere, grabs both cables to my headphones from behind and rips them out of my ears. Karen, excuse me. Why are there 2 cars in front of mine so I cannot get it out? This lot would stack cars in 4 or 5 deep side by side and move them around with a small truck to release them. Me? Please don't touch me, and I don't think you should be in there. And I don't, Karen, you shouldn't be listening to music on the job anyway, or slacking off taking pictures of other people's belongings. You're probably back here stealing. I attempt to point at the Lizard Insurance logo on my blue jacket, but Karen continues on. Karen, are you going to do your job, or do I need to call the police because you're refusing to give me my property? Me. Have you went into the office at ABC Towing? Karen. No, I saw you here, and you need to move these cars so I can get mine and leave. As Karen opens the door and gets into the first car and the ones blocking her. Me. Hey! No, you can't go in there, that is police evidence. I use my cell phone to call ABC Towing and inform them. Karen, if you won't move these cars, then I will. Where are the keys? Me. In the office with the employees. At this time, the manager comes running out with one of those weird smartphone / Nextel style phones in his hand. ABC manager. Hey lady, get the hell out of there. Those cars are property of the state police. Frantically uses his Nextel to talk to someone. Sees the chain used to keep the lot closed has been cut with bolt cutters yawl. Karen was carrying a pair of bolt cutters and had thrown them into her car when she was back at it. And Karen argue back and forth. I intently listen and half pay attention as I finish my duties for work. About 8-10 minutes pass and 7 police cars come flying back into the lot. Greets the police and explains what is going on, but not after Karen attempts to scream at the police that I had stolen her car. Police, tell Karen to stand over in a direction he points, sending one officer to wait with her. Turns out the lieutenant was on scene who was in charge of the county's police tow licenses. After getting M's story, LT comes to me and takes mine. While I'm informing him of what happens, Karen overhears and starts yelling and attempting to approach me. The officer standing with her grabbed her by her arm. Karen yanked that arm out of the female officer's hand and shoved her, surprisingly knocking the officer down. Karen is screaming incoherently as she charges toward me. The LT steps in front of me and with his taser hits Karen with the most beautiful sound in the world. Karen goes limp and face plants in the dirt, light gravel of the lot and skids slightly. They immediately handcuff her. Turns out Karen had walked onto the lot carrying the bolt cutters while I was in the office talking with staff about the 2 cars I needed to adjust. She had been roaming the lot until she saw me and I happened to be near her car. Karen was charged with burglary, 2 counts of tampering with evidence, assault on a police officer, assault on me, trespassing and resisting arrest. I know Karen did jail time, but I'm not sure how much. Years later, the tow company I now own impounded her car for being double parked. She remembered who I was and quietly paid. The revenge was perfectly executed. Karen's arrogance and entitlement led her to escalate the situation, resulting in her own downfall. Her attempts to be oversmart backfired, leaving her with a criminal record and a humiliating experience. The next story is from Ambulance Driver 2. Jackass manager gets his comeuppance. Entirely too many years ago, I started to work at a fast food company. Let's call it Southern State Not Baked Poultry. Southern State Not Baked Poultry wasn't a bad first job. I was 16, and the assistant manager at that location was my best friend's stepdad. So we took what was tedious and menial and tried to make it fun. He was actually a really good manager and genuinely cared about the people who worked for him. We would do silly stuff before the store opened while we were doing prep. He would have music playing loudly from his office. As long as everything got done and done well, he really didn't care if we had fun doing it. We'll call him Larry. This story is not about him, though. This story is about our store manager. We'll call him Tim. Tim was the exact opposite of our assistant manager. Everything had to be taken seriously. Fun was outlawed. I genuinely hated working with Tim. Tim was an egocentric, power-hungry, petty little man with delusions of grandeur because he was a manager for Southern State Not Baked Poultry. Tim's approach to managing was to work the employee until they burned out. When they did, fire them and hire someone else. Needless to say, morale when Tim worked was in the garbage. Tim hated that crews would prefer working with Larry instead of him. He hated that crews had fun when Larry was working. He hated that our store's numbers were always better when Larry worked. Mostly, he just hated everyone. But one thing that he absolutely hated was a silly little thing Larry did. If it was before the restaurant opened, he would stick his tongue between his teeth and lower lip and shout out a "hi" name to whichever employee had just walked in. It sounded absolutely ridiculous. I would always do the same thing back, which ended up sounding something like, "Hi, Wowie." A perfect example of what an ass Tim was is this. There was a young woman who, due to a variety of stresses, attempted to commit suicide after a particularly grueling shift working with Tim. After she had recovered, she came back for her last paycheck, and Larry was working. Not a coincidence. She called the store to find out what day he was working. So Larry sat her down out in the lobby, bought her lunch, brought her last check out, and sat and talked with her for about an hour. It was after the lunch rush, and he had the time. So he made sure she was doing okay now, talked about whatever she wanted to talk about. By the time she left, she was smiling, but had tears on her cheeks. She had never had someone just sit and listen and let her talk out everything that was going on. Well, the next day, Tim had come in and hauled Larry into the office. His words, and I can quote them exactly, because the office was a tiny little cube with no ceiling, just a place to stash paperwork and a computer, were, "The next time the queen comes in, tell her to do it right next time." So now you have a clear picture of exactly how petty and vindictive this little man was. Here is where the revenge starts. We were scheduled to have the regional and national bigwigs for Southern State Not Baked Poultry come through our area for an annual inspection. Tim had his eyes set on being one of those bigwigs, at least for the region. Why wouldn't he be? He did everything by the book. That automatically made him a good manager, at least in his eyes. Everything had a checklist and a procedure and a set of written instructions in the book, and if you couldn't meet the expectations set forth in the book, well, Tim would yell at you and berate you. Because that's how a manager manages, you see. Well, before the bigwigs got to our store, we knew what day they would be coming. Several of us had agreed that on the day they came through, we would all screw up just enough to get Tim to blow his cool. Because our regional manager and the national bigwigs all believed that Southern State Not Baked Poultry was a family company, and that employees were valuable team members. The day in question arrived, and the bigwigs were there for their big tour. Whoops, One of the fryers hadn't had the oil replaced last night. Oh look, the shaker table hadn't been cleaned. Darn it, we've got way too much coleslaw made up and we won't get through it before we have to toss it. Crap, we don't have enough chicken poultry in the cooker to fulfill the lunch rush. Man, someone forgot to preheat the second cooker. You get the picture. After the second time, I took a minute to long to get a basket of chicken poultry into the cooker. Tim absolutely lost his yelling, cursing, throwing things. He actually physically pushed me away from the breading station in the middle of the lunch rush, while the regional manager and several bigwigs from National stood there. While we had a line several people deep at both cash registers and a lobby full of people eating. Tim stood there, gulping like a fish. His mouth was moving like he was trying to say something, but no sounds were coming out. The room was absolutely quiet, other than the beeping of a fryer that was done. I looked at Tim. This was the moment we had all been gearing up for. I looked down at where he had pushed me, a set of handprints in flour on my chest, and I cut loose into him, yelled at him that I quit, took off my apron, and threw it at him. Told him I was tired of his abuse, of his poor management, of how he single-handedly drove morale through the floor every time he walked through the doors. How he was a crappy excuse for a manager, and that if he didn't have Larry and a couple of good shift leads, he'd have driven the location out of business a long time ago. All the colour drained from his face, and he bolted to the office cube. The national and regional folks ended up comping everyone's meals that were in the restaurant. Interestingly enough, Tim was not fired, but he was demoted to assistant manager. Larry was promoted to manager. About 10 years later, I was working at my current job as an EMT. We had just dropped a patient off at the hospital that was across the street from the same restaurant, and my partner was hungry, so we drove across the street and pulled in. Now, I hadn't set foot in that restaurant since the day I had quit. But lo and behold, who was working the counter? But Tim himself. And his name tag still shows assistant manager. The restaurant was empty since it was between lunch and dinner time, and I just couldn't help myself. I stuck my tongue between my teeth and lower lip and as loud as I could shouted out, "Hi, Twim!" Haven't been back there since, but that was around 12 years ago. I'm willing to bet he's still just the assistant manager there. The revenge was perfect and executed strategically. Tim deserved the demotion he got. People Tim are the foul eggs in the corporate sector. Instead of encouraging a suicidal employee, he made cruel comments about him. Nothing can be meaner than this. BTW, "Hi Twim," was personal. The next story is from Jerdman76. Competitor IT company steals our articles. I owned an IT company, we'll call it, Ubertech, that strictly manages business networks. No website development, graphics, etc. One of my employees was tackling an interesting support request with instructions for making changes to a company's website. This happens from time to time where a customer gets confused with their various tech vendors or assumes that we provide all tech-related services. He called the person to get more context, and being in earshot, I could tell that my employee's call was quickly escalating with a frustrated person on the other end, and he has already offered to pass the call off to his manager, me. Ubertech, how can I help you? Pissed off website owner. Web owner. I want to know what is going on here. I don't know who you are, I don't know why you're calling me, and I don't know why you have my support information. Me? Sir, to be honest, I don't know who you are, why we are calling you, and why we have your support information either. But together, I think we can figure this out. I understand that you have a website and made a request for some changes. Who hosts your website? Web owner. Derp company. On their support website, there are instructions to send support requests. I followed them, and now I have you calling me with my support information. Me. Sir, I definitely want to get down to the bottom of this. We do not even offer website services. If you would please work with me, I am sure we can get an answer. What I want to do is have you share your screen with me and then show me what you did to request support. I had him run our remote control software. He then proceeded to navigate to Derpco's support website, support.derpco.com, navigated through the customer self-service pages to a knowledge base article, KB, on how to submit a support. He pulled up this specific KB article, and I was staring at a verbatim copy of an article that I had written on our own support site. There were no changes to the article, including the step to email your support request to, and it was my company's email address right there. Me. Thank you for taking the time to show me this. I think I've found the problem. Notice the email address in the instructions. It is telling you to email ubertech.com. That is us. Now, please allow me to show you something. I then scrolled down to the bottom of Derpco's plagiarized support article and noted the creation date, 2007. I then navigated to our company support website, support.ubertech.com, and navigated to our own matching article. We both confirmed that it was the same article, and I showed him the creation date of our article, 2005. Web owner: oh, look at that. Me: I think it is safe to say that Derpco has stolen our content, did not even update the instructions, misleading you to send a support request to us. Web owner: I am sure you have a few things to take care of with Derpco. I would appreciate it if you do not mention us when you call them. Me: of course, sir. Thank you for your time with this. I immediately searched Derpco's support website looking for more of our stolen content, found a total of 5 articles, and promptly printed them out and saved copies as PDF. So what to do in this situation? Do I call the owner of Derpco? This is a small town, so I needed to be clever and not taint my own image. How do I get revenge? Hire a lawyer? Leave the articles as is and hope more support requests come to us that can bring us business? Revenge unleashed. No, I wrote a press release. News release date for immediate release. Title: Ubertech endorsed by local competitor. I got some great kudos from local businesses. One client in particular was rolling. 2 days later, I get an email from the owner of Derpco. I would appreciate it if you were to remove the press release from your website. This is a small town and it is just not good business. I went to their support site and still found 3 articles from our company. I wrote back and told him that I would be happy to do so, but there are at least still 3 articles on their support site that need to be removed. 2 days later, I got another email confirming that the articles were removed. Epilogue. In the end, I took down our press release, but still have a copy kept in our office and would tell this story our new employees. Edits. Fixed typos, abbreviations, added more clarification. TL. DR. Competitor steals our KB articles and failed to make any revisions, leaving our company info in the instructions. We created a press release to announce how they endorsed us, as the instructions were sending their clients to us for support. The revenge was perfect and was executed flawlessly. By strategically releasing a press release, OP exposed the competitor's unethical behavior without directly tarnishing his own reputation. This was really a strategical move on the part of OP to take a brutal revenge. The next story is from Pokey, 1984. I posted this as a reply to someone else's mailbox story. I was informed that it should be its own post, so here it is, edited slightly for clarity. This didn't start out as a quest for vengeance. We just wanted mail delivery to our house. Vengeance came as a byproduct, but it was truly delightful nonetheless. So, mailbox story time. This happened back in 1982, for the record. My folks moved to a very rural area on a gravel road. No one had previously lived here, so it was a battle just getting mail delivery in the first place. My folks went several rounds with the local postmaster. He was somewhat enamored with his own power and very much a rules-to-the-letter kind of guy. Every I must be dotted, every T crossed, and if there's so much as a semicolon out of place, you'll have to start all over again. He seemed to have made it his personal mission to make getting mail delivery to a new address as difficult as humanly possible. Ultimately, my folks managed to fill out the paperwork to his satisfaction, and he begrudgingly allowed us to put up a box and receive mail delivery at our new home. Dad was extremely careful in the placement of our box, and making absolutely certain was the exact height, precise placement from the road, etc., to avoid annoying our local postmaster any more than we already had. There are, or at least were, very specific rules about rural mailboxes. Dad followed every single one. That first mailbox was perfect. The man who drove the road grader was as annoyed as the local postmaster, as he now had a new driveway to accommodate. We suspect that's why he had it out for our mailbox. After the road grader had demolished 3 of our mailboxes, Dad got pissed. Previously, he'd used the most basic design, just a post in the ground with a box on top. Now, he was motivated. Dad got a hold of a 9-foot-long section of metal pipe. It's 4 inches in diameter, out of measurement, and has 3/4-inch thick walls. I have no idea what this was originally intended for, but I know how Dad used it. He dug a hole 5.5 feet deep. He welded an upside-down tripod shape, think open umbrella, to the bottom of the pole and dropped it into the 6-foot-wide hole. Each welded-on leg was about 3 feet of some kind of rebar, and there were 5 such spokes. He then dropped some huge rocks on top of the tripod shape to hold it in place. The empty spaces around the huge rocks were filled in with gravel, and he dumped sand to fill in the air gaps. Then he filled the rest of the hold in with dirt and mounted the mailbox on top of the post. 3 days after Dad installed the new mailbox, we heard the road grader coming down the road. Our house is a 1/4 mile from the road, but we heard the loud clang from inside. We also heard the cursing and swearing from inside. No one went down to look until they heard the road grader drive away. When they did, the box itself was slightly dented on one side, but it was still firmly upright and functional. 3 weeks later, we received a bill from the township for a bent grader blade. It was accompanied by a letter informing us that we had caused damage to city property because our mailbox was installed incorrectly. It would need to be moved, and we were liable for a bill of a couple $1,000s worth of repairs. Here's where it becomes pro-revenge instead of petty. Recall the fact that the local postmaster was annoyed with us over our battle to get mail delivery? Mom had made a point of each time we reinstalled the mailbox, taking photographs down to the post office and having the local postmaster sign off approval of the height, placement, etc. She'd done the same with Dad's superpost and had documented, signed approval of the box, dated the day before the road grader had bent his blade trying to demolish the box. She submitted copies of the invoice for the grader blade and the letter stating that the damage was our fault because our mailbox was incorrectly placed to the post office. She also submitted copies of the official post office approval of the box to the township. The jerk of a postmaster was also quite prideful and became furious that his authority was being called into question by some podunk township. As far as he was concerned, the township wasn't questioning my parents. They were stating that his judgment was wrong. I don't know what went down between the postmaster and the township, but we received a second letter from the post office reiterating their approval of our mailbox. We also got a formal apology from the township and noticed that the road grader's contract had been terminated because he'd lied about damage to city property. It was worded with a tone that said, "Please don't sue us because a contractor employed damaged your property." For the record, that post Dad installed nearly 40 years ago is still standing. We've replaced the box on top many times. That post, however, has now wrecked 2 cars and a truck in addition to that long-ago road grader. The revenge was cool as cucumber. The road grader's attempts backfired and cost him his job. That was the truly satisfying to apologising to OP's mom. BTW, the best part was road grader losing his job. The revenge was really perfect, and it was executed flawlessly. The next story is from Angel Guide Indy. He ruined my sister's only birth experience, so I made sure he'd never forget her. Obligatory apology for formatting as I'm on mobile. Kind of my revenge, kind of my sister's, both of us really proud. This is going to be long, so TL, DR at bottom. Here's our cast. My sister, we'll call her Sarah for the story. Sister's ex-BF. Paul, ex-BF's new wife. Jane, ex-BF's parents, Mr. and Mrs. Doe, oldest brother. Zeke, our parents and me. When I was 14 and my oldest sister, Sarah, was 22, we found out that she was pregnant with Paul, her boyfriend of 4 years. They immediately got engaged and they were really happy. For a time. Sarah had a horrible pregnancy. About 16, 18 weeks in the wonder of creating a human life evaporated within her. She developed hyperemesis, which, if you don't know, is really bad morning sickness. She was constantly in pain. She developed gestational diabetes and just all around hated the experience. Around this time, Paul, the then fiancé, started getting sick of the complaining. I believe the argument was, "Your body is built to do this. It can't be that bad." Sarah was due around Valentine's Day, and Paul's parents, Mr. and Mrs. Doe, were very excited, both about the grandkid and the fact that he could be born on a holiday. She was very against that, and really hoped that her son wouldn't be born on a holiday, even one as small as Valentine's Day. Her birthday sometimes falls on Easter and she hates it, because it might make him feel that his day isn't very much about him. Well, Mrs. Doe says something like, "Well, if you name him Valentine or Valentino, then that'll make the day even more special to him." Again, sister hated the idea. She thought it was tacky, he'd be bullied for it, and just really didn't like the name Valentino. Paul loved it, but agreed to go with a more average name like Daniel or Jared. Fast forward to February, and she was ready to get this over with. Sarah had officially been put on bed rest because while standing or walking, her blood pressure took unexpected spikes and dips. I look back now, and goodness do I feel bad for her. She was doing her best to avoid giving birth on Valentine's Day because, again, she didn't want him born on a holiday. Unfortunately, births happen when they happen, and that baby was going to come on Valentine's Day, whether she wanted him to or not. I remember waiting out in the waiting room with my dad, brothers, and Paul, who couldn't stand to be in the delivery room because it was gross. I was so mad that he could have gone in, but wouldn't because he thought my sister was gross while giving birth, whereas I had to stay outside because I was too young to go in with my mom and other sister. Dad went home with the youngest 2 brothers while the oldest, Zeke, stayed to watch me because I refused to leave. 16 hours after Sarah went into labor, my little nephew was officially part of the family on the evening of Valentine's Day. Unfortunately, Sarah was not okay. She had to have an emergency cesarean section, and while doing the operation, discovered that the back of her uterus, facing her spinal cord, had a very large and very severe, thankfully non-cancerous tumor. When I say large, I mean it was twice the size of a standard uterus. The doctors were shocked and didn't understand why nobody had noticed it on an ultrasound. It accounted for her severe back pain and blood pressure issues. The doctors immediately went in for more surgery to remove the tumor, but sadly ended up having to perform a full hysterectomy. This meant that my nephew would be Sarah's only child. Now, while Sarah was in for surgery, Paul was taking care of everything baby-related to make sure his son was okay. In my 14-year-old self's memory, I remember him being suitably distraught, but I didn't really pay him much mind and spent my time in the waiting room with my mother and other sister. Zeke, however, wanted to be a good future brother-in-law and make sure that Paul was okay. He found Paul filling out the baby paperwork on his own looking, in my brother's words, like he had not a single worry in his mind. Zeke asked why Paul didn't wait for Sarah to fill out the paperwork, as she should have been put of surgery within the hour, and Paul said that he just wanted her to get her rest and heal. That checked out with Zeke, as he was 16 and didn't know any better at the time. Now I know what you're probably thinking. No, he wouldn't. He knows how much she hates that name. And still, she'd need to sign the paperwork too. My fellow peoples of Reddit, I regret to inform you that Paul forged Sarah's signature on the paperwork and waited until she was out of surgery to hand said paperwork over. My sweet nephew, that was born on Valentine's Day, was named Valentino on his first official birth certificate. I still to this day don't know why Paul and his family were so insistent about the name. He had even picked out a different one with my sister. And, before you ask, no, he was never brought up on forgery charges because his parents were witnesses to her signing the papers, even though they only got there at the last minute. So Sarah dumped him and got her son's name changed a month later. She was willing to do split custody with him because that's her son's father, and she wants the kid to know him. But Paul vanished, and she never heard anything back, which seemed weirdly out of character to us, until a mutual friend on Facebook was tagged in his wedding pictures 6 months later. Paul had apparently started cheating on her not long after she got pregnant. Sarah was livid, but there wasn't much she could do, so she filed for child support and continued to live her best life. Until 6 years later. This is where the revenge starts, my friends. So Sarah has been a single mother for the past 6 years and has been amazing at it. At this point in my career, I've been a hairdresser for about 8 months at our local Great Clips. I'm working one day, and who is seated before me but Jane, Paul's wife herself. I take her back for a trim, and she clearly has no idea who I am. That adds up because a mutual friend that still keeps in contact with Paul said that Jane doesn't know a thing. She has no idea about Sarah, that she was the other woman, or that Paul actually has a kid that he's been, infrequently, paying child support for. She's in the dark on it all. I told myself not to be an ass and treat her like a normal customer, which I did. Now, at this point, Jane was heavily pregnant, so a lot of our conversation was about that. She loved being pregnant, but it was hard. Her husband was so unsympathetic, big shocker, and she was due in 10 weeks, and they still hadn't picked out a name for their baby girl. Ladies and gentle peoples, this was my chance. I asked what kind of name she was looking for, and she said, "I want something unique and unusual, but not ridiculous like Brantley Eye." You know the ones I'm talking about. And Paul had suggested so many already, and she didn't like any of them. So I, conniving little weasel I am, said, "What about Sarah?" My sister's name isn't actually Sarah. She was named after an older family member that passed not long after she was born, but there was no female equivalent for his name, so our parents created one. It's a beautiful name and just what Jane was looking for. She loved it, she stuck by it, and I found out by stalking her Facebook months later that she had put her foot down about it, and that was their daughter's name. Now Paul has a daughter with his ex's name to remind him every day about her. Little nephew is 10 years old now, with a new name and no contact with his biological father, though we do still sometimes call him Val as a family nickname. He likes it, but doesn't want to bring it to school, so it's staying a family nickname. Sarah pretends to hate when we call him that, in a joking way. As long as he likes it, she doesn't have a problem with it. And she's seeing a new guy who's really great and like a father to Val. TL, Dita. My sister's baby daddy forged her signature on paperwork while she was in surgery to name their son a name that she had been avidly against from the beginning. Then broke all contact when she dumped him and married the girl he was cheating on her with while she was pregnant. 6 years later, I meet his wife and convince her to name her daughter my sister's name because the wife has no idea my sister and her son exist. The revenge was sweet. OP's love for his sister is incredible, and what he did shows a lot of love for his sister. However, I don't think Paul has got what he deserved. He deserved much more than this. The next story is from unhappy_taste. Taught a lesson to my idiot boss who tried to get credit and promotion for a software I made and fired me over it. I was working in a finance company last year. One day, I proposed to my manager that since I have a computer programming background, I know that for that manual job XYZ, automation can be done using some new tech and it'll reduce 500 man-hours per week. He also has some tech background, so he says it hasn't been done because it can't be done and behaved with condescension. I, being bullheaded and with to prove and CV to build, developed it on my own, in my own time, on my home computer, then compiled it into a binary, single executable file without code, and gave it to him. He got permission from IT department to run it on his computer and was utterly sure that it won't work, and he would get to laugh at me. But it did. Even though the software works, idiot manager took it as an insult somehow and banned me from using it, giving some inane reason that doing it manually was much more effective, which was a bummer because it was working beautifully. Fast forward a quarter or so, my manager was hard-pressed for some brownie points during appraisal, so in examples of showing initiative, he used my software, but without mentioning me. Some super senior manager took notice and gave him a promotion and a raise. Now, instead of being a sensible guy and coming clean to get code from me, he calls me in his cabin, behaves rudely, and says that I need to submit the code for that software. I asked him why. You had said we won't be using it? He's like, either you submit the code or you'll be fired. I was already fed up of being treated like shit by this stain just because he was somehow jealous. So I said, F off, I won't submit the code. I know enough law to know that you can't sue me, and I resign. I came to know later through my colleagues that this is what he must have wanted, so that he could take the entire credit himself without dispute. Little did he know, there was a malicious code module hidden in that executable file, which checked for a 1 or 0 on a remote GitHub repository every time it was run. If 1 or no network, do everything as required, but if a 0 is received, that's emergency signal. I added that little code because his behavior was very to begin with, and I didn't trust him. I was planning to remove it after its official implementation, which never happened. So I went ahead and changed that 1 to 0 after I was fired, to ensure no one used it without my permission. Although he couldn't get the code, he did have the executable file, and I was also not in the company anymore. So in his arrogance, he called a meeting with his boss, his colleagues, and my whole team to show them a demo of this awesome software he had made. He was using it on his laptop every day without my knowledge. But today, the 1 was 0, so as soon as he pressed enter, nothing happened. Pressed enter again, nada. Suddenly, his laptop was frozen and nothing was working anymore. It took him a while to realize something fishy was going on, and then he took out the laptop battery to switch it off. By then, all the Word, Excel, and PowerPoint files were encrypted, and the executable had erased itself out of existence. I used the same code, without the malicious module, to get a better job at another company, where I'm much more appreciated and the job is also fun. Then the whole COVID thing happened, and now I'm cozily working from my home. My previous colleagues of that company keep telling me that they are being forced to go to office. So somehow it was the best decision I had made accidentally. That idiot boss's promotion and raise got cancelled because he couldn't produce what he promised. He also got reprimanded for losing a lot of important company data, which he attributed to some unknown virus, which wasn't believable because no one's allowed to put anything on those office laptops without security clearance from IT department. He called me one night, drunk, angry, threatening me that he knows what I did. I feigned ignorance and quoted something like, "It happens to people," and blocked his number. But I had to tell someone about this flawless victory over stupid without being implicated, so here it is. Update. Hello, people. Thanks for all the likes and comments. I love you guys. I'm overwhelmed, to say the least. There are some questions which keep coming up again and again, so I'm answering them here in the post. I tried to answer each of them in the comments individually, but now I have to sleep. Q1. Being a finance-related company, they generally have stringent security measures. How could IT department allow the manager to load the program on his laptop, and why didn't they check its network communication or run it through an antivirus? A1. This is not the kind of company a lot of people here are envisioning. Yes, they have security measures like blocked USB ports, firewalls, etc. in place, but just so that if a client visit happens, they can qualify. Most of the employees in IT department are highly underpaid, sick of red tapeism and blame games, so if it's not a very weird request, they generally just ask for an email from project manager and load whatever software they need, especially custom ones, because they can't really verify them. Horrible practice, I know, but no one cares there. If it happens, which is quite frequent there, everyone starts showing their email copies to everyone and it becomes a mess. Another reason is that the financial data which these guys process is historical, and hence not very sensitive. Obviously, they pretend to care, but even if someone stole it, it's not like some sensitive insider trading info which has very high value. Maybe that's why no one cares much. Regarding firewall restrictions, they are also quite lax. Like I mentioned in the comments, they keep blocking websites when they realize people are wasting time on them. Common time waster banned websites being FB, Instagram, Reddit, most porn sites, most games sites, etc. There have been instances when people have been able to open a site if it's quite new. Once it's known, it's blocked promptly. Obviously, websites like Stack Overflow, GitHub, Bitbucket are not blocked because they don't see them as time wasters and someone somewhere keeps requesting access to them for productive work. They did run the program through a basic antivirus. It didn't show up as suspicious and there can be a lot of reasons for it, primary being the antivirus. I keep checking it on my comp and it's not detected there either. Maybe because the code doesn't seem familiar enough to it. Maybe because I used Golang. Maybe because they just suck. I don't know. And I am not an expert in antiviruses, but the ones I've tried in VM are Quick Heal, McAfee, and Norton. And all three of them don't show anything. That company was using Quick Heal. Q2. Why did you have to encrypt the files? Why couldn't you just leave it at self-destruction? It's a felony. It's a crime. A2. Yes, guys, I know it's a crime. And sadly, I don't really have a fancy excuse for this. I was just plain cocky and angry. I felt I wouldn't get caught, and that guy was up my ass from a long time. I instinctively knew he would do some weird when I'd hand it over to him, so I wanted to teach him a lesson. If he did some if he would have implemented it, I would have replaced it with the non-exploit version and no one would have known. If he would have given me a sane reason not to implement it, that also would have been fine. Even if he wouldn't have fired me, shown coerced resignation, I might not have triggered it from outside because of the risks. But when he stooped so low as to claim it as his own while getting rid of me, I lost all sense of self-preservation, left the company and just let it go. Kaboom, I knew that it had only encrypted the docs he was working on, and nothing more than that, and the general protocol is to just format the affected laptop afterwards. No one really bothers there to trace the source or to notify authorities. Random malware virus cases have happened there before. Also, due to my personal history with that guy, I kinda knew what he would do and what he wouldn't. Having said that, a lot of could have gone sideways, and although I was super careful at each step, it could have turned into a horrible nightmare. Anyone getting inspired by this, do not do this, please. Q3. How do you know what happened in that meeting? A3. My ex-colleagues told me everything over drinks later. They are unaware of my involvement. Q4. Can you get caught due to your GitHub repo, as they can trace the homing signal to that? A4. It's an anonymous repo made with a fake email ID. It just consists some garbage generic-looking HTML text with a YN hidden in it. I never log in or access it directly, and through unlikely, even if GitHub saw its access logs, it'd never trace back to my actual IP. Q5. Sometimes you say you were fired and sometimes you say you resigned. A5. I was asked to resign. I didn't have any choice. It's equivalent to getting fired. I chose to resign peacefully because I already had my eyes on another company which needed me. I did not want this black mark on my CV and did not want to keep working by telling on this guy to the seniors and creating an even hostile work environment. The job was not worth it anyway. Q6. How long did you take to make it? A6. 3-4 months. Q7. What tech stack did you use? A7. Golang for coding, Linux as OS, some external libs but mostly STLib provided everything I needed. Compiled into a single statically linked binary targeted for Windows 10. Q8. Why couldn't you just sell it and get rich? A8. It's not that easy. It'd have taken years of convincing, security compliance and things I generally wasn't in a mood to get into. Getting a job in another company and then implementing it there was easier. Got a good package because of it. I'm building up on it so that I can start my own consulting firm in a few years when I have some senior perspective of tech plus finance. Q9. Final aftermath of the manager. A9. He was given an offer of promotion and raise, contingent on implementation of this software, which never happened, so the offer got cancelled and he had to go through a lot of embarrassment. The reprimands I talked about were mostly because some client meetings got delayed due to the missing Excel and PPT files that he had to make again over next 2 weeks. I guess he must have had some versions of backups in mail. I came to know that he was able to reproduce them again eventually. Q10. Can it ever be traced back to you? A10. Since I manually copied the file on my manager's USB drive, then he himself went and got the approval for its installation on his laptop, saying that he was the file owner and responsible for it, and then he himself executed it. In the process encrypting, deleting only his own files, I don't come in the picture at all. Even if tomorrow he tells the truth to everyone, there's nothing that points to me. I've erased its existence from my side. All I have to say, I don't know what the this guy's talking about. That's it, guys. I hope you enjoyed the story. In case you think it's fake, well, too bad. Sometimes reality is stranger than fiction. The revenge was perfect and deeply satisfying, and it was executed subtly but strategically. It was a bitter lesson for the credit thief manager. The downfall of the manager was called on by his own arrogance and toxic behavior. Very interesting Reddit story from Zakana. I got fired. Employers' lawyers should have done their homework. I did. This happened to me about 20 years ago while in college. I am being deliberately vague because reasons. Background. I got a job basically office sitting on weekends. I showed up at 8 a.m. and every hour I checked over things, handled the occasional phone call, and then left when the 4 p.m. person arrived. Most of the time I read, watched TV, or played games on my laptop. I probably worked no more 10 minutes of every hour unless something went wrong. It went on like this for years. The pay was decent, holidays were double pay, and I even had opportunities to cover weekday shifts when others were sick. One day, while I was covering the midday shift, my boss asked me to come into his office. He told me that the evening weekday position was going to become available that night. He offered me the position, which I accepted. I was told to punch out and return at 5 p.m. that night. The reason it went down like this should be obvious. Things went okay for a while. I showed up at 4 p.m., did the normal things, and then left at 12 a.m. when my relief arrived. It was a little more work, more call volumes, etc. Then, after 9 months, things started to go south. The daytime person developed a huge attitude problem and went from a nice person to a total Karen. She would complain about everything I did. For example, one time, a system jammed up at a remote site, and she called them. 5 hours later, I saw the jam was still there, so I called that site again to see if they were still working on it or if something else was wrong, because the woman on our end, who would be the one to help them, was leaving soon. They did have a problem, and so I hooked them up. My reward for making sure the problem got solved and not having to bother an upper-level employee at home on a Friday just after having left work? I got yelled at because Karen complained that I had apparently ignored her log entry about the issue. My defense was ignored. The boss had me highlight important things on the log to verify that I had read them. Things plodded on for a while with this new normal. I tiptoed around Karen when needed, thankful for the fact I only had to deal with her for no more than 5 minutes. I did the stupid highlighting thing, and my log entries started getting more and more detailed, even referencing Karen's calls when I had to follow up on an issue that crossed shifts. The firing. The following summer, just after I crossed year mark, I went on vacation to visit some friends out of state. When I got back, after about a week, my boss came down after everyone had left and had me describe how I did a certain task, which involved certain updates. I explained to him how I did it and so forth. He then told me that I had not been doing it at all and that he was firing me. I had transposed the date code of the English file for the French file, which was the previous one. The newest one had already been applied anyways, so nothing was wrong. It was just a reason to get rid of me. So I left the office. My state is an at-will employment state, which means that I can quit at any time for any reason, and my employer can terminate me at any time for any reason. The only exceptions were state and federal laws such as race, religion, etc. I thought I was screwed, so I just started applying everywhere I could. During my job search, I happened to accidentally stumble upon a link about employment law. Out of curiosity, I read it and discovered that my employer had shot themselves in the foot. In the employee handbook, there was a job security clause. What this stated was that they would never lay us off and such if our jobs were eliminated. We would simply be retrained and sent to fill an opening elsewhere in the company. It sounds good, but it resulted in them cooking up reasons to fire people to get around it. But their fancy, high-priced lawyers had missed something. In my state's laws, the ones passed by the legislature, I was screwed because of at will. What they neglected was case law, the ones determined by courts. This site cited a case from the state's Supreme Court that had ruled that a job security clause waived at will on the employer side, turning it into a just cause relationship. This means that they had to have a real reason to fire me. The revenge. With that in hand, I sought out a lawyer. After my consultation with her, I set about collecting my evidence. My former boss did not realize that I knew more about this program than he did, seeing as I ran the same software on my own computer and laptop. I experimented. The date of the file, which they tried to use against me, is baked into the version 2. I was able to demonstrate to my lawyer that if I applied the same update over and over, which my former employer stated would change the date every day, would, in reality, display the date of the file. I showed this by backdating my own copy by a year using the update archive available from the vendor. Next, I showed her how the task used to be automated. A script would snag the file and process it every day on its own. A change on the vendor's site broke the script. It was an easy fix, but no one bothered to do it because the guy who had wrote it retired. The fix involved deleting 3 characters on one line in the script. The task was also marked as only being a weekday task. In my firing, I was told how important this update was and so forth. If it was so important, why was it not done on weekends or holidays? The vendor pushed out updates on those days too, as I showed my lawyer the one from Christmas morning. And why had the automation not been fixed? With all that in hand, she contacted them. After presenting them with the law they broke and all the evidence I had collected, they were forced to settle with me. So in the end, their fancy high-priced lawyers did not do their homework. I did. Thank you to the wonderful librarians I have known in my life who taught me my information literacy skills. They paid dividends in this case. TLDR, I got fired by a large corporation, and though I had no recourse. Then I found out their lawyers missed something in my state's laws and forced them to pay me. Edit 1. Obviously, the terms of the settlement are confidential and AFIC still in effect. It was a good portion of my salary though. I did also get unemployment during this time as well. I never found out how the reaction went down, as the main corporate office that would have dealt with it was in another state, and I never had any contact with those people. I imagine a new handbook was issued before they cut my check though, so I feel bad for those who remained. Karen's fate was sealed about a year later. I saw a Facebook post by a former co-worker mentioning that his job with them had ended, so I asked for details. The company experienced a huge loss in revenue. As a result, Karen lost her job as the site I had worked in was closed. Of about the 50 of us that worked in that office, only 10 or so were moved to another location. Thankfully, most of the ones I liked were old enough to retire. It did not take a genius to realize that my termination was simply a layoff disguised as a firing. This revenge was perfect and executed flawlessly. By uncovering a legal loophole and meticulously gathering evidence, OP outsmarted a large corporation and forced them into a costly settlement. These toxic corporate looters deserve these hefty settlements. Story is from Extremely Tired of HR. I reported my former landlord to the IRS for tax fraud as revenge for him making up lies on me to keep my deposit. He had to file for bankruptcy and lost his condo. I'm glad he lost his house. I found this guy on Craigslist a few years ago. I like renting condos from private owners as opposed to renting apartments. Typically, by renting a condo, it's safer, you have more caring residents, you get to have a luxury apartment-style home with all the amenities, and you can negotiate pricing, etc. I am an excellent tenant, and anyone who I have rented from will tell you that. I paid a $1,000 deposit to move into this guy's condo. I was on a year lease. He lives in another state, but we were on the same time zone. On month 8 of my lease, I came home to a door that wouldn't open. I couldn't get the door unlocked for shit. I had 2 keys on me. As much as I tried to turn them, I couldn't. One of the keys even broke in the lock. I waited 2 hours. I called, texted, and emailed my landlord, and he did not pick up. I thought maybe he had someone to change the locks for some reason. I honestly didn't know what to think and had no one to help me. The lady who lived across from me saw me in distress as she was going into her apartment. I had never seen her, but she asked me if I were okay, and I explained to her that I couldn't get into the apartment. She told me that she knows of an on-call locksmith. She gives me his number. I tell her thanks and reach out to my landlord a few more times. No response. I had no choice but to call the locksmith, plus I had to pee like. The locksmith arrives and could not get the door unlocked with my key. He says he can replace the lock for like $100. I told him I was renting a condo and couldn't get in touch with the owner, and didn't know when would be the next time I could get in touch with him. After he took the lock off, he told me it was faulty. So he replaced the lock. I told the landlord this via email and text and voicemail, and told him that I could send him copies of the keys if he wanted. Okay, so fast forward to the end of my lease. I demand that he does a walkthrough with me. He said he wouldn't. I told him that if he didn't do a walkthrough, I would be notifying the condo office, as he did not have permission to sublease by the association. He then had a friend to serve as his proxy to come meet me and walk through the unit. The place was spotless. I know how to clean. I took multiple photos and videos and showed his proxy, who is a police officer, the unit. Actually, they are both police officers who used to work together. We both literally tested all the appliances, faucets, checked the blinds, carpets, hardwood, everything. His proxy gave me the okay and said that everything looked great. I give his proxy the keys and later that night left for my new city. So fast forward to a month later, I haven't heard from him about my deposit. He ignored all my emails and phone calls. He finally gets back with me 2 months after I moved out and has all this ridiculous made-up about how I damaged his unit. Broken blinds, scratches on the hardwood floor. He made it seem like I damaged his door by getting the lock replaced. He said there were scratches on the outside of his door, rust here and there. Broken dishwasher, broken sink, oven was broke. Broken dryer, SMFH, just all lies. I would never leave a unit in that condition. He sent me an itemized list of all the charges that magically came out to be $1,000, the same as my deposit. He was always planning to keep my money. He wanted that money to either ball on it or upgrade his condo. I hated him. I decided I wasn't going to go to court because I had moved to a different state and live alone, but I thought of something. He rented to me under the table and likely didn't claim my rent payments as earned income. I had all my wire transfers on my bank statement. I had his routing and account number and a copy of his driver's license as we agreed to swap IDs when I signed the lease to make sure I wasn't getting scammed. I found his out-of-state address online, gathered all my bank statements, gathered his bank account numbers, and made a report with the IRS. About a few years later, I check up on things and that bastard lost his condo and lost everything he owned in bankruptcy. I paid for and downloaded his court records and saw proof that he lost everything, including his condo and cars, and had his bank account seized. I'm not sure if he has gone to jail or anything, but I'm so glad that bastard got his karma. He stole money from me that I gave him to rent a condo, and he ends up losing that same condo to bankruptcy. Him and anyone who calls him a friend. He can rot for all I care. The revenge was truly perfect and executed flawlessly. By reporting his landlord's tax fraud, OP hit his landlord where it hurt the most. Landlord's dishonest behavior finally led to his bankruptcy, and he lost everything. The revenge was really satisfying and cool. Very interesting Reddit story from Flying Monkey 737. Revenge is sweeter when they don't know it's you. So this is a story about a guy I considered a friend. To this day, he has absolutely no idea that I am the main person who exposed him, and I hope to keep it that way. The main characters in this story are myself, badass pilot, girlfriend 1, girlfriend 2, and girlfriend 3, young female pilot, and a bunch of other randos needed to fill out the story. I witnessed most of this myself, but I also included details from other people who witnessed things when I was not there. I fully trust the sources of the reports. So, Badass Pilot is a pilot, as the name suggests, but he doesn't work for an airline. He started teaching at a flight school in his 20s, but decided to strike out on his own because, as he told everyone else, he could do it better. He spends the next few years trying to destroy the reputation of his first employer. Badass Pilot is a very likable guy, and lots of people think he's awesome and believe him. I am one of them. Now, when he starts out, he drives a super car, doesn't have an office, gets evicted from his apartment for not paying rent, and so on. But people like him, and they help him set up a school and help fix it up and generally give him a hand. Every once in a while, people get pissed off at him because he does things to other people, but his circle of friends defend him and just think he's great. He tells these pretty whopping tales, he's funny, and people naturally like to be with him. A lot of his stories have made-up details designed to put other people down, but he tells them in a highly entertaining way. His behavior is a bit crazy, and some of the reason people hang out with him is that he will do crazy stuff that is not normal. Plus now, he throws good parties. He also has this cute girlfriend, girlfriend 1, and they end up living together. To be clear, she is pretty cool, definitely not a raging bee, is fun, throws him a huge party for his 30th birthday, and so on. Now, while he's with girlfriend, he is still coming on to other women when she's not looking. A couple of times I have seen him totally love bomb a hot girl, usually someone in a vulnerable position, like if he knows she's going through a bad breakup. He showers them with attention, gets them totally interested in him, says girlfriend 1 cheated on him, they're on a break, or some other such story that isn't true. He sleeps with them, and then he ghosts them and says they're crazy and does anything else he can to get rid of them so girlfriend doesn't get suspicious. As an example, after he cheated on girlfriend with one girl, she tried to get in touch with him after he ghosted her, which is actually a reasonable thing to do. Instead of talking to her himself, Badass Pilot lied and told everyone she was crazy and was stalking him, reported her to his friends at the police department, and had the police call her and tell her to shove off. On top of that, he also starts telling these crazy stories about girlfriend, totally criticizing her behind her back, telling everyone what a loser she is, and generally not appreciating having a relationship that most people would love to have. So you get the idea on how he treats women. When Badass Pilot and girlfriend finally break up, he told everyone that she was cheating on him when it was the other way around. His excuse for tanking an interview for his dream job was that he discovered girlfriend was cheating the night before. He was an emotional wreck, and that's why he flubbed the interview. There were a bunch of inconsistencies with his timeline, and I knew it wasn't true, but he told the story to anyone within earshot, and people just accepted his version of events. And so he made everyone hate the ex and feel sorry for him, which is a common theme. So anyhow, he and girlfriend 1 break up. He is drinking heavily, partying all the time, and a bunch of us get a front row seat as he comes close to destroying his life, parties hard, acts like a sleaze, hits on women constantly, and works his way through any woman who will sleep with him, setting some new low records. A few months later, he hooks up with one of his students, let's call her girlfriend, and pretty much immediately moves into her house. This seems to stabilize him and help him get his life on track. Over the next few years, he gets a cush offer flying corporate charters. He's a likable guy, which helps him get a sweet contract as a private pilot for a billionaire, which he brags about non-stop to everyone. They also pay for him to get trained to fly jets. He gets a new car that doesn't look like a piece of and he lives in a nice house. His flight school is no longer a frat house, and it's more of a family-friendly environment. Girlfriend too helps him out at the flight school, and life is pretty good for badass pilot. To put the icing on the cake, the FAA is looking for new blood to fill a highly prestigious job of pilot examiner. These are people who are pilots with a lot of experience, well-respected members of the local community with good judgment and a lot of power over student pilots and other flight schools. They also tend to make tons of money because they can charge any price people will pay to get their license, and there isn't a lot of competition. Badass Pilot has friends at the FAA who like him, and he gets the job. He brags to people that it's like printing money tax-free since students have to pay in cash. Sounds weird, I know, but it's true. And he says the IRS doesn't need to know about it. So Badass Pilot is now in his 30s at the pinnacle of his career, earning tons of money, and has lots of power over people in the industry. And the success really goes to Badass Pilot's head. Now, as you might have guessed, Badass Pilot is still the same person he was before, just with a lot more money, power, and success. Badass Pilot still likes to brag loudly that he is the best instructor around and he has the best flight school. He still tells people how bad other flight schools in the area are, even though he shouldn't be saying anything due to his job as an examiner. He talks about his friends and his students and tells embarrassing stories about them, but I don't think much of it because they're funny and they're not about me. It doesn't really register with me at the time, but he is really good at getting other people to pile on and hate the people he hates, and really good at destroying people's reputations behind their back with things that turn out to be total lies. I start to hear him put down girlfriend too and say things about her that I know aren't true. I still don't pay attention to it because there are lots of loud guys in aviation who like to brag and make up stories. I continue to think of him as a friend and have even confided in him about something that I am sensitive about and looked to him for advice. So one day when I'm in town, I was hanging out with him and a bunch of people at the Badass Pilot Flight School shooting the breeze. After I left, I realized I forgot something, so came in the back way through the mechanic shop next door. I heard him talking in his very loud voice so everyone could hear, and that's when I realized he was talking about me. Not only was he talking about me, but he was totally lying about my embarrassing situation, made it totally different and 1,000 times worse than what it was, and turned it into something that could potentially end my career. I thought he respected me and was my friend, but he was destroying my reputation and tearing me down behind my back. Luckily, nobody saw me, and I slinked out the way I came in. I spent weeks feeling humiliated and betrayed. I reflected on the way I had seen him treat people and started to see things in a different light. Now, I knew that he had tanked some careers. He has a lot of contacts in the industry, and he has bragged about calling companies that are hiring and telling them not to hire certain people. One of his favorite sayings is that aviation is a small world, and you shouldn't burn any bridges because it will come back to bite you in the ass. He bragged several times about bringing people down a peg and making someone he disliked lose a job they had applied for by calling the company owner. Usually, he did it because he wanted to take revenge for something he thought they did to him. But he was also jealous of people who graduated college, he didn't, and people who came from stable families, he didn't. He would always talk about how bad his home life was as a child and really try to get people to feel sorry for him. Keep in mind, he's an adult in his late 30s. I also knew that despite becoming more stable with GF2, he had not changed his ways with women. He acted like he respected women in front of GF2, but every time he was off on a trip, and even at his own airport, he could get pretty aggressive with women, would push them hard to see how far he could take things. As an example, he flirted aggressively with the receptionist at the building next door from his flight school. The receptionist was young and relatively new and had no idea girlfriend two existed. She, F-18 or 19, called the Badass Pilot Flight School and left a flirty message for Badass Pilot, M35, totally in line with how Badass Pilot was interacting with her. I was not there, but a witness said GF2 played the message on the machine and made Badass Pilot listen to it. He sheepishly said he had no idea why she would leave such a message, and girlfriend told him in no uncertain terms that he was obviously leading her on, exploiting a young woman, and he needed to stop. Then, instead of taking responsibility for his own actions, badass pilot took revenge on the young girl. He immediately complained to the airport manager and got her fired. She ended up packing her stuff in a box and leaving that same day. So, while badass pilot is fun to be around as long as you're on his good side, he will if he thinks you are against him. I knew I had to be careful. I wasn't sure yet what I was going to do, but I decided I needed to be close in order to get more information. So I sucked it up, pretended I wasn't humiliated and had never heard him talking about me, and spent more days at the flight school when I had time off. Everyone at the flight school was in and out all the time, so sometimes I'd be the only person there, and I could easily sit down behind badass pilot's desk and start scrolling through his files. That's when I hit the jackpot. Badass pilot was logged into all the same accounts on his desktop that he was on his phone, email, messaging, everything. And boy, did he like to text. Now, one of the things some of his students complained about was that badass pilot would not stop texting, even when he was supposed to be instructing people in the plane. He even lost a few students who were so annoyed by him texting during a lesson that they went somewhere else for lessons. And now I knew why. Badass pilot was a addict. That's the only way I can describe it. Some people might describe him as a serial harasser. His entire messaging history was full of photos, videos, you name it, it was right there on his computer. I copied everything. I played the videos and recorded them on my phone. I took the snapshots. I took pictures of the texts. I must have spent an hour trying to copy this stuff. And I ran out of time because someone came back, so I minimized the tabs and casually left the office. I enlisted the help of another aviator that badass pilot had screwed over, and we went through the treasure trove with a fine tooth comb. We had to research the phone numbers to find out who these people were, and we classified them into known aviation and other. We even found that he was doing the nasty with a couple of people there at the flight school. Not quite the family-friendly environment everyone thought it was. It became clear that his activity made him totally ineligible to be an FAA examiner. Plenty of the texts were just plain harassment from a guy with a lot of power in the aviation industry, flirting with and pressuring young women who were hoping to become pilots for everything from photos to acts, sometimes pretending it was all just a big joke. He had no problems sending dick pics to women. That in and of itself made him unqualified to be an examiner. However, he went even further and had contact with at least one person he tested. This is extremely dangerous because it compromises his ability to evaluate if someone is able to pilot a plane safely. If he is threatened with a lawsuit or criminal charge and has to test one of these women, or even someone they know, he might be coerced to pass an unsafe pilot, which could result in death. August 2017. My pilot friend and I decide the best thing to do is send the information to the FAA, but we know we have to do it anonymously because our careers could be on the line. So we carefully packaged up a bunch of evidence, sent it into the FAA office that he reported to, and waited for the fallout. And nothing happened. The FAA literally ignored evidence that they had a predator as a pilot examiner. This is a pretty old boys' club environment, so maybe not too surprising. For our next attempt, we approached a young female pilot we identified from the evidence who seemed like she tried to stop badass pilot when he got out of hand with her. We approached her to see if she would be willing to come forward and tell the FAA about her experience. She basically said all it would do was get her slut-shamed and blacklisted, especially after she heard that the FAA did nothing with our anonymous package we sent in. She said badass pilot would most likely ruin her career and nobody would hire her, and he would make sure her reputation was destroyed. I had to agree. Fast forward to 2018. I make him homeless. I thought maybe I should just tell girlfriends about what I'd found, but I kept chickening out. I also didn't want to be exposed myself, as I have to protect my career, and I was certain badass pilot would try to destroy me if he found out. One morning, I was sitting in the school playing with the iPad while girlfriend was behind the desk. Wouldn't you know it, she is texting Badass Pilot, who is flying, and Badass Pilot is logged into the flight school iPad I'm using. I can see her messages to him, and I can also see that he had someone the night before, and that he sent a video of himself to a student before that. I take photos for evidence, as usual. Girlfriend who is reading and not looking up at me, so I just mumble something and hand her the iPad with open full screen as I walk out the door. I wait in the parking lot in my car, and about 10 minutes later, girlfriend 2 leaves the school with the iPad in hand and drives home. I made sure to be scarce the rest of that day, as I didn't want to raise any suspicions about my own involvement. Apparently, girlfriend owns the property where they live, so she immediately moved his stuff out and permanently banned Badass Pilot, who started sleeping at the flight school. From what I pieced together that week, girlfriend was so alarmed by the evidence that she demanded that Badass Pilot see a therapist or she would report him to the authorities, and he could potentially be arrested. One thing I should mention is that girlfriend 2 has a child, which is important. Badass Pilot was using her child to set up booty calls for himself, set up playdate with another child, with child's mother while kids are playing video games. Badass Pilot slept on a cot in the flight school, stayed drunk, and looked like a homeless person for a couple of months before he ended up getting his own place. We also let Badass Pilot's billionaire employer know that he was a sex predator, as well as a few other people anonymously. I wanted to make sure girlfriend 2 knew all the gory details of Badass Pilot's sexual activities in case she was even considering getting back together with him after he did therapy. So I kept sending her more information anonymously too. Young female pilot kept in contact and apparently had some conversation with other female pilots. Nobody was willing to go on record, but they all started sending anonymous letters to the FAA, hoping they would at least investigate him. The next thing I hear is that Badass Pilot is telling everyone that he broke up with girlfriend, that she is crazy and trying to destroy his reputation, and that she's sending false anonymous letters to the FAA because she's jealous. From what we could tell, the FAA interviewed Badass Pilot, but nothing happened because he blamed girlfriend for sending the letters. True to form, Badass Pilot also made sure everyone at the flight school hated her and felt sorry that he was being victimized by her. He also called the police and told them she was harassing him and told them he was banning her from his flight school. Nothing else happens. This all starts to die down, and Badass Pilot is still an examiner. He still works for his billionaire boss, as well as a very wealthy owner of a car dealership who also races cars, and he still runs a flight school with plenty of students. Again, he starts sleeping with another student at the school, who will now be named Girlfriend 3. Badass Pilot continues to complain to everyone that he has been victimized by girlfriend. Badass Pilot gets girlfriend, who has never met girlfriend, so wound up about her that she is spitting tax every time she is mentioned. This is important later. Fast forward to 2019. WTF? Not only has Badass Pilot not been punished by the FAA, but the FAA has increased his responsibilities so that now he can also conduct instrument flight exams for students. Young female pilot stays in touch, and we talk periodically, sworn to secrecy, of course. We have a couple of male pilots who are also sworn to secrecy to protect our own jobs. When the FAA promoted Badass Pilot to instrument examiner, despite all of the complaints they had received, young female pilot and her friends get really pissed off. They are still unwilling to risk their own jobs, however. Reader, please don't judge me or young female pilot for this. It is very expensive to become a pilot, easy to get blacklisted by someone at the FAA or someone like Badass Pilot, and then you have no way to make a living or to pay back a huge amount of student loans if you're in debt. So we hatch a plan to have her call girlfriend and tell her about the frustrations of the other female pilots in hopes that she will think of something to do. A detail I should mention, girlfriend who does not fly for a career, and she has her own business not related to aviation. So young female pilot calls girlfriend on someone else's phone. Girlfriend who doesn't know young female pilot, and we don't think she would betray her, but the situation is still very risky for young female pilot. She discusses how frustrating it is that a sexual harasser gets promoted by the FAA with no consequences when the FAA knows about his harassment, and girlfriend 2 agrees that she will try to make information public to protect other women. She agrees to post a review on Yelp and maybe some other platforms. I do my best to be at the badass pilot flight school when this goes down. True to her word, girlfriend posts a very straightforward and factual Yelp review, and heads explode at the flight school. People are forwarding the review on, and it spreads like wildfire all over the aviation industry. Think owner sends messages of himself to female students. Yikes. And totally true. Other people have posted unfavorable reviews before, but Badass Pilot has been able to have them taken down, falsely claiming that the review is a fake account or from a competing flight school. But there has been nothing like this that I know of. Badass Pilot and girlfriend, who now appears to be a co-owner of the flight school and who has posted a positive review of the school on Yelp, go into damage control mode. Badass Pilot tries to get girlfriend 2 arrested or at least harassed by his friends at the local police department. He's frantically trying to get the review shut down with Yelp. His brain is literally exploding, and I, along with everyone else at the school, am agreeing with him that girlfriend is a total lying, crazy, conniving, vindictive bee, and that she needs to be punished. All while laughing on the inside. Badass Pilot next engages one of his instructors, who was friends with girlfriend, to meet with her and ask her to take down the review, but she does not. Badass Pilot is finally successful in getting Yelp to remove the review a day or two later. The same process also happens with another platform that shall remain nameless. Badass Pilot gets everyone to bombard girlfriend 2 with hate mail, which makes me glad I am still anonymous. Badass Pilot also tells the instructors at his school that they are not allowed to be friends with girlfriend, and they will be fired if they are. Fast forward to August 2019. Mission accomplished. What happened to Badass Pilot? We later found out that the FAA ended up doing an investigation on Badass Pilot. Finally, Badass Pilot totally lost all of his examiner privileges. On top of that, his flight school had an FAA written testing center, which was also permanently closed. And even beyond that, Badass Pilot can't have any affiliation with the FAA in any way, shape, or form. He can't even host an educational seminar or continuing credits class for the FAA. While some up-and-coming pilots and people outside the industry might never hear about Badass Pilot being totally humiliated and losing his examiner status, believe me when I tell you that everyone in the profession knows what happened. And it has got to burn. What happened to me? I am pretty much back to enjoying my time at the airport like I used to. There are still parties and flyouts, and ultimately some people don't care that Badass Pilot harasses women or destroys people's careers. But he has definitely been taken down a peg, as he likes to say. I just don't trust anything Badass Pilot says, and I don't heap on other people he's trying to destroy. I still feel a little twinge of delight whenever I hear Badass Pilot tell new students that he used to be an examiner, but the liability insurance was too high, so he quit. Another thing that I get a chuckle out of is that Badass Pilot has started talking behind Girlfriend 3's back. I tried to warn her, and even sent her, anonymously, of course, information about Badass Pilot. But so far Girlfriend 3 is standing by her man, and I'm just sitting here eating popcorn watching the story unfold again. TL, DR friend, who is a badass pilot, screws me over. I find out he's a perv and get him fired from his job. The revenge was perfect and executed flawlessly. OP did a wonderful job by exposing her friend's toxic behavior through anonymous tips and coordinated leaks. It is satisfying to see OP's misogynistic and friend losing a high-profile job and getting humiliated for his mean actions.